So I think everyone here, I say most, I'm sure there may be one or two or three, who are not aware that our church is involved in supporting me as we train pastors all over the world. And that I recently took a sabbatical, 3 months, to focus on this ministry. And so really what today is about is I kind of want to give an account. Like I feel like I need to share with you where we are and a lot of what's going on. And I think it's super exciting stuff. And so I do want to start by just theologically kind of framing what it is that we're doing and, scripturally, I guess in the form of, like a devotion or whatever before we kind of get into some of the actual things that are going on. So 3 weeks ago, I was in Sierra Leone, Africa, which is a country that is 80% Muslim. And I don't know what the percent Christian is. It's not super high there. And I was to teach the pastor schools in two different cities, in Waterloo and in Wellington. And I was told that maybe we would have 30 pastors in each location. We had 58 pastors in the first location and 54 pastors in the second location. And they were absolutely floored. They were just overwhelmed. The exact words I heard from at least a dozen different pastors is, we've never heard anything like this before. This is a game changer for us. And they made a statement, which I'm going to correct because I don't think it's a correct statement, but they said, we've been praying for a vehicle to take the gospel to, or to take the kingdom to Muslim Africa. And we think this is the vehicle, this pastor training. Now, I want to correct that by saying that I'm not so naive to think that what we're doing is the answer for Northern Africa. There's a lot of awesome missionaries over there, a lot of awesome missionaries who have been working very hard in that region. And Jesus is the answer for Muslim Africa. The gospel is the answer for Muslim Africa. The kingdom is the answer for Muslim Africa. But those guys intuitively understood something that I believe to be true. And that is that leadership training or discipling leaders at a high level is vital to the advance of the kingdom. That it's absolutely crucial to the advance of the kingdom. And I think that the Apostle Paul agrees with me. And so the text that I want to take a look at today is 2 Timothy 2:2, which is kind of becoming our ministry verse. And it's a familiar passage to many of us. And the things that you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men who will also be qualified to teach others. Now, again, Paul's talking about discipling leaders at a very high level. And he's talking about what I want to call the quantity and the quality of discipling leaders. Like, who are we discipling and what exactly are we teaching them? And so let's start with the quantity. Who is Paul discipling here? Well, the answer is obvious. It's Timothy, right? So he's writing to Timothy, his young protege. And so the question now becomes, well, who exactly is Timothy? So Timothy was actually this kid who was led to Christ during Paul's first missionary journey as he was going through Lystra. And Timothy's mother and grandmother were won to Christ. We believe they, in turn, won Timothy to Christ, and they have been discipling Timothy until Paul comes back through on his second missionary journey. And it appears that Timothy has this great reputation. It says that everyone in the church spoke well of him. And Paul took a liking to Timothy. And so he asked if he could bring Timothy with him on the rest of his journey. And we believe that at this time, Timothy is no more than 13 years old. Now, parents, if some religious leader came through and said, I'd like to take your 13-year-old with me on the rest of my ministry, what would you say about that? But that is what's going on. And so this is who Timothy is. And so Paul begins to pour himself into Timothy. He begins to disciple Timothy. And he alludes to this. He says, the things that you have heard me say. Basically, in our travels, as we go, in the presence of many witnesses, you pass these things on. You entrust these to reliable men. And so Timothy responds. And he begins to grow in the Lord. As Paul pours himself into Timothy, Timothy takes on great spiritual authority. Timothy is listed as the co-author of 2 Corinthians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and Philemon. Now, we like to say, oh yeah, Paul wrote that. Paul wrote all this stuff. Well, according to the Scriptures, it's Paul and Timothy. Now, Timothy's name means something on these letters. If it didn't, Paul would not have included it. And at the very least, we know that they know Timothy in these cities. Like, Timothy is a known commodity to them. Furthermore, Timothy's name on the letters seems to add weight. It seems to add gravitas to what it is that Paul is trying to say. And so it appears that Timothy has spiritual authority in these churches. They respect Timothy. They honor Timothy. Oh, Paul and Timothy are saying that. Wow. We need to listen up to this letter. Now, that kind of spiritual authority, that kind of leadership is not given. It is earned. Furthermore, we also know through the New Testament that it was Paul's habit to send Timothy to these different communities in his place. And so we know, for example, that he sent Timothy to Philippi, to Ephesus, to Corinth, to Colossae, and Thessalonica. And those are the ones that we know about. If he's sending him to that many places, he is likely, sending him to other places. Why? Because Timothy has authority in these places. Why? Because he has been discipled. Because Paul has raised him up as a kingdom leader. And at this time, honestly, he's sending Timothy a lot because he's passing the torch. He knows that his time is short, and he is preparing Timothy to take his place. And so, Paul disciples Timothy at a very high level. He raises him up in the kingdom. Yet, is Timothy the only one? And the answer to that question is no. Because the things that Paul is saying to Timothy, he's also saying in the presence of many witnesses. So he's like, Timothy, I have been discipling you, and others have been present. And they can vouch for this discipleship. They have been a part of this discipleship. So who are these many witnesses? Who are these people that Paul has been discipling along with Timothy? Well, the New Testament records 16 companions of Paul on his missionary journeys. People who are living with Paul, literally living with Paul, just like Timothy. Barnabas, Luke, Timothy, Silas, Aquila and Priscilla, Titus, etc. Furthermore, Paul also lists no less than 19 co-laborers. People who, he says, are operating with him at a high level. People that he has likewise poured himself into and have prepared for ministry. People like Archippus and Epaphroditus and Lydia and Junia, etc. And so there were at least 35 people that we know of that are named in the New Testament that are likely to be among the many witnesses that are being discipled right along Timothy. And so Paul is not just discipling Timothy. There's a quantity to this. He is discipling other people. He's discipling many people, many other leaders. And so did Paul just come up with this on his own? Like he just, okay, I need to disciple all these different people. No. He learned this from his Lord, who also had 12 disciples. And there were others who followed Jesus around, that were part of his inner circle, that he poured into, that sat at his feet and learned from him. And so what we see as we look at this is how Christianity works. This is how the kingdom advances. It's leaders discipling leaders. Now, the need for discipling leaders has never been greater than it is today. There are approximately 2.3 billion Christians in the world. There are close to 900 million Protestant and or evangelical Christians. Those are people who do not consider, or Christians who do not consider themselves Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. And the average church size in the world is 60 people. So if you do the math, if every one of those people went to church, that would mean there would be over 14 million churches in the world. Now, we know that not everybody goes to church, but the church rate among Christians overseas is much higher than it is in the United States. And so let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's half. I believe it's better than half, but let's just say that it's half. That's still 7 million churches, all who have leaders, all have pastors. Now, the Mission Research Center at Gordon Conwell Seminary did a study, a global study. They invested all kinds of resources and time to discern how many trained pastors there are in the world. And what they mean by that are those who have been formally trained, those who have a seminary or Bible college degree, and they came up with 250,000 in the whole world. 250,000 trained leaders. Now, that seems kind of low to me, so let's double it. Let's say it's 500,000. So 500,000 pastors for a minimum of 7 million churches in the world. That's far less than 10%. It's 7% actually. But the numbers may actually be more dire than that. And so just the sheer need of someone to disciple pastors is incredible. We have a massive job to do. And so Paul here is not just talking about or laying out a pattern for discipleship and discipling leaders. He is giving a mandate, I believe personally, for kingdom growth. And so this is the quantity, this is the need that is out there. Sometimes people come to me and say, well, do they really need you, to go over and do something like that, or isn't somebody else doing this or that sort of thing? And the truth is, there needs to be 1,000 groups doing what it is that we do. And even then, we wouldn't even scratch the surface of the need. So Paul talks about the quantity of discipleship. He also talks about the quality of discipleship. And so when I say the need for discipling leaders has never been greater today, I'm pointing to the fact, and this has actually likewise been validated by multiple studies, and that is that leaders who have had training struggle are far less than those who have not. Those who have not had an opportunity to be discipled at a high level struggle with all kinds of things. And so here are some of the things, some of the struggles that pastors have shared with me. These are all firsthand things that pastors have said. For starters, they just struggle with biblical understanding. We don't understand the Bible. People say, well, why are they a pastor? Because no one else is doing it. They're in communities where no one has been trained. Nobody understands, and somebody's got to do it. And so they step up. And they know they don't have the understanding that they need, but they don't know how to resolve the issue. They struggle with theological integrity. That's another thing, heresy, basically. They know that their beliefs oftentimes are wrong. They know that there's something not right, but they don't really know how to fix it. And so, and I'll give you, for instance, there's a saying in Latin America that if you had the passion of the Pentecostals and the doctrine of the Baptists and the money of the Mormons, you'd have the perfect church. And so they say this all the time. That's like one of the things that you hear. And so most of the people that we actually train are Pentecostal. Because that's who's there in the places where we go. And so we will tell people, look, we're Baptists. And they go, oh yeah, we know. And I'll say, and all the people that teach us are Baptists. And they say, oh yeah, we know. And we're teaching you Baptist theology. Oh yeah, we know. Why do you want us to teach you? And then the response is always the same in every country. It's because we know that Baptists have the best doctrine. That's what the Pentecostals say. Why are they saying that? Because they know that there's some things that are not right. And they're looking for theological health. They're looking for theological integrity. They struggle with cults where there is a lack of knowledge. That's where the cults really come in and try to take advantage and try to leverage in those situations. And so it is not uncommon for us to go into an area and find Mormon theology in some of our churches, Christian churches, to find Jehovah's Witness theology in some of the churches, because it's everywhere, and they're very aggressive and influential. Animism, and that's where rocks and trees and rivers and the sun and all that have spirits, and you worship those things. And Spiritism, where they're worshiping straight up spirits, and then actually in some places there's straight up demonism, where people are practicing witchcraft and worshiping demons. In Peru, they actually have, we saw several satanic churches with 666 on the front door, right out there in the community, right on the main road, First Church of Satan sort of thing. And so there's that influence as well. Legalism is a huge issue. Sean and Kathy were with me this week in El Salvador. And I asked the pastors, how many of you preach 3 times a week? And pretty much every pastor raised their hand. How many of you preach 4 times a week? Most of them raised their hand. How many of you preach 5 times a week? About a third of them raised their hand. How many of you preach 6 times a week? And one guy said he preaches 6 times a week. I met a pastor, Pentecostal pastor, in El Salvador one time who boasted that he hadn't had a day off in 29 years. There's this idea that they just have to be working for the Lord. It's performance. It's, and they're just bogged down. And, they don't have time actually to do a lot of the things that we're teaching them, to do discipleship, to do evangelism, to do missions, and these other things, because they're so busy just keeping up with church services and meeting every single night because of the legalism that exists. Hyper-Pentecostalism, or extreme expressions of Pentecostalism, where people are going far beyond the biblical witness, is a big problem. And I'm hearing that from the Pentecostals. Institutionalism is big. Very institutional. They process faith often in places we go very institutionally. It's not organic. It's not overly spiritual or relational. It's just, and that's what we gave them, honestly. When we were taking colonial Christianity down to them in the 50s and 60s. Evangelism, they don't know how to do evangelism. Discipleship, they don't know how to disciple others. Missions and church planting, they don't know how to do. Church leadership, just pastoral leadership, pastoral ministry, they don't know how to lead their congregations. Preaching biblical messages. In fact, in one community in which we go, they don't even call it preaching, because they don't use the Bible. They call it exhortation. They get a subject like prayer or forgiveness or whatever, love or whatever, and they will just pray, and then they'll say, okay, I'm going to talk about these things, and they stand up and they just chastise their congregation week after week about whatever it is that the Lord has laid on their heart that week without using the Bible. Because they don't know how to take a text and then turn the text into a sermon. In fact, I asked our coordinator in El Salvador, we had I don't know, how many people were there, Sean, in the class this week? Was it 80-something? So we had 80-something students in San Salvador. And our coordinator, his name is Eduvigas Nerio Lopez. And so we just call him Ed. And so I said, Ed, how many of these guys have ever heard any of this stuff? Because that's what we talk about. I say the number one rule, I repeated it over and over and over, is that the content of your sermon needs to come from the text. I said, how many of these guys have ever heard that before? He said, none of them. And that's probably one of the more sophisticated groups that we have. And so preaching is an issue. Having a historical perspective, knowing who they are as a people, they don't have. Confidence. Pastors don't have confidence. Discouragement, you wouldn't believe. Marriages falling apart. Depression amongst these guys. Some of them are preaching 4, 5, 6 nights a week, and they have jobs. In fact, they're all bivocational. I mean, could you imagine, how difficult that would be? And so pastors are struggling, and they need help. And Paul indirectly, I believe, well, for Timothy it would be directly, but for us it's kind of indirectly. He addresses this and what to teach them. Like, what are we going to teach these qualified men? So these who are qualified to teach others. So again, he's talking about leaders. What are we going to teach these other leaders? He said, well, the things that you've heard me tell you. And so what are these things? Well, we know what some of those are directly. So Paul has been discipling Timothy all this time, and he's spent a lot of time with Timothy, and he's been teaching Timothy things, and then he writes Timothy a couple of letters. And in the letters, he's just reinforcing the things that he has been teaching Timothy. That's Paul's pattern. I'm going to get to that in a minute. And so he reinforces in letters what he's told people verbally. And so we know from 1st and 2nd Timothy some of the things that Paul has been saying. And then likewise, I think Paul's letters in general are also an incredible indication of the things that he has been teaching Timothy. Because we see common patterns in the letters, don't we? There are common things that he's teaching. And again, the letters aren't the primary message to the particular city in which they are going. The messenger carries the message. There's so much more that can be contained in a letter that they have to share. But the letter is sent to validate the message in the messenger and reinforce it for posterity's sake, so that they can have it and hold on to it. And so the things that Paul is sharing verbally, he's writing down in his letters. The things that he's saying to Timothy, he's writing down in his letter. So what are these things that Timothy has heard him say in the presence of many witnesses? Well, generally speaking, without going through half the New Testament, there are three things that Paul emphasizes. He emphasizes orthodoxy or right doctrine. And again, we need to look no further than Timothy. 1 Timothy 4:6, watch your life and doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers. 2 Timothy 2:15, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a workman who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth. And then, so there's orthodoxy or right doctrine. Then there's what we call orthopraxy or right practice. And Paul emphasizes that. 1 Timothy 3:2-4, he's talking about practice with the form of overseers and elders. He said, now the overseer must be above reproach. The husband of one wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. In 1 Corinthians 14, where he's talking about the use of tongues, the proper use of tongues, he's talking about orthopraxy, right practice. What shall we say then, brothers, when you come together? Everyone has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. All of these must be done for the strengthening of the church. Orthopraxy, right practice. Orthodoxy, right doctrine. And then the third thing that he emphasizes is what we call orthopathos, or a right spirit. That if these things are not done with the right spirit, they're no good. Again, back to Timothy. But you, man of God, flee from all this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. He directly addresses ministry in 1 Corinthians 1-3 and how it needs to be done with orthopathos. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels and have not love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. And so when we do ministry, even if we're doing right doctrine, right practice, if love is not involved, then there's something wrong with that. So this is who Paul is. This is what he's emphasizing everywhere he goes. Orthodoxy, orthopraxis, orthopathy. Right doctrine, right practice, right spirit. Now, this is really what we've tried to address in our program as we teach pastors. We try to balance these three things through the whole thing. So it's a very holistic approach. And again, the church has graciously allowed me 3 months where I feel like I worked twice as hard as I as I do when I'm here. But there was so much that needed to be done, and I just poured myself into it. And I just want to give you an update of kind of where it's going and what the ministry looks like right now. In part because I really want to encourage you, because your graciousness and your relationship with me and how that has played out, I think there's real fruit there, and I want you to see that fruit. I want you to understand what's happening. Just for starters, just some of the nuts and bolts stuff before I get to some of the relational stuff. Out in the foyer, I have some materials. I spent the first 2 months, I'm not kidding, I'm writing 8, 10, 12 hours a day, which is really hard. And I'm finishing whole classes, writing whole classes, revising classes, editing all of them, and then finally putting them in a form that's uniform. And so you go out and you see the books. I mean, they look great. They all look like they belong together. We can now hand these to anybody. They can go teach somewhere, which is awesome. And so, the curriculum is complete, which has been a huge issue for the last 2 years for us. Because we had people needing classes, and I only had one guy that could teach it, and the material wasn't complete, so I can't have someone else go teach. And so we were starting to fall behind. We could not respond to the needs that we have. Now we're able to do that. The website will be live within the next couple of days. I'm waiting on some pictures. We're going to integrate in from the trip. I just got back last night from El Salvador, and so we're going to integrate those in. The corporate documents are completed and have been filed with the IRS for the nonprofit status and all of that kind of stuff, which is actually a bigger deal than you think. And there's a lot that goes into that. That is now complete. In fact, I received confirmation of that yesterday. We now have a new partner with the state convention. I want to see if I can just share the significance of this. So, and Sean and Kathy will tell you this. None of this is possible without a legitimate network. We call ourselves pastor-to-pastor training networks, and they truly are a network. I couldn't have done anything without Pastor Ed down in El Salvador and Central America. The guy's absolutely amazing. He's brilliant. And he is able to get out and recruit pastors, and just, he's so efficient, so godly. He's awesome. But also without Alan Morris, who is our local director of missions. And he kind of works with 4 different associations, and he has access right now to about 80 pastors. And we're using about 15, 17, somewhere in that neighborhood, pastors to go over and teach. And Alan recruits them, he schedules them, he gets them all going. And so with Alan, the areas that he has, we probably have about 15 schools, 15 locations throughout El Salvador, Honduras, and Peru where his guys teach. And then there's, and I'll explain later, there's other schools that we have where nationals are leading. But we've been able to do 15 schools and start movements in these 3 countries, incredible movements in these 3 countries. And that's just with one U.S. coordinator, Alan. So the state convention, the Southern Baptist State Convention here, has approximately 3,700 churches. And they divided the state up into 6 regions, and they have a mission strategist in each region. That's 650 churches each, which is, 8, 9 times more churches than Allen has. And the partnership is this. Those mission strategists basically, in part, kind of, I would say they work... They say, yeah, they're working for you. I would say they're working with me. But they're going to do what Alan does in these much larger areas. So the goal is to reproduce Alan 6 times. So now there's not 1 of him, now there's 7 of him. Recruiting pastors, preparing them, building that network, and getting these guys out on the field. And we've targeted multiple new countries. Each region has started to begin with. It has adopted a country in Latin America where we're going to go. And so that partnership is incredible, and the potential of that. Again, we just keep seeing just incredible exponential growth. We started, actually, the first class that stuck, because our first class was a failure, was in April of 2016. So we're looking at 3.5 years. we went from 2 schools, and then at the end of the second year, maybe there were 6 schools. The end of the third year, there's like 20 schools. By the time we're at the end of 4 years, it's, by the end of 2020, say, we're probably going to be looking at 40, 45 schools with just Americans teaching. We have at least that many schools that nationals will be teaching, probably more. We'll probably be at 100 schools by the end of next year. And that's crazy. The other partnership that we have established, in fact, I'm going for a big meeting in January, is with the International Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest mission agency in the world. And they don't do this. And they saw what we were doing, they got wind of it, and I have been networking and coordinating with no less than 5 of their key personnel and to make that happen. And so some of them are in their corporate office in Virginia, which is where I'm going to go, and some of them are on the field. And so they call Latin America the Americas. And so they're bringing all their missionaries from the Americas. They all come back at one time in one place, and that's in early January. And I've been invited to those meetings where we will be coordinating, taking it to the Americas through partnership with the International Mission Board, which is insane to me. We now have the capacity to receive money. I'm not up here begging for money. And the people in our church just give through the church. If you just give to the church and designate pastor school, that's where it goes. And basically, I'll be honest with you, and again, Sean and Kathy will vouch for me. I kept telling them all week, and they'll vouch for this, is I don't know how to communicate the ethos of this, the spirit of this, what's the dynamic, the energy of it back to the church. I just don't know how to do it. The words are too small. They're insufficient to be able to explain this. But just the incredible dynamic over there and the energy and the movement nature of it. And really, our church has been funding that. Our church, our little church here in Cumming, Georgia, is funding this whole thing to this point. And now we're trying to take it beyond that. And there have been people who have come to me, how can we give? How can we give? We've had no way to do that until actually yesterday. And so now people are able to start giving to the organization. They'll be able to do it through the website when it's up. Or if you want, you can just give it through our church if you are interested in doing that. Again, I'm just telling you that we now have the capacity for that. I'm not up here saying, everybody needs to give to the pastor school. Another thing that kind of floored me before I go into the specific partnerships, I asked Ed this week, because he was telling me a story about one of the pastors who took the mission course, who's went out and started 2 churches since then. And he's got a little church. He's got like 40, 50 members in his church. And they've gone out and they've started 2 churches. And I said, Ed, how many churches have been started through this ministry because of P2P? And he thought about it for a minute, and he goes, somewhere between 40 and 50, just in El Salvador. So had we as a church decided, hey, we're going to go do some church planting, which is the frontline, cutting-edge mission work is church planting. If we were going to go out and plant some churches, and we intentionally picked a place and said, we're going to go plant a church here, how many churches do you think we could have planted in 3 years? Maybe 1. That's right. But by training leaders, the things that you have heard me say, entrust to reliable men who will also be qualified to teach others. The fruit is incredible. We're being told that these churches are healthier, their preaching is better. In fact, we taught the preaching course in Peru, and Julio Rojas Flores, our coordinator from Peru, was there at our graduation this week. And he said, you wouldn't believe it. The pastors are all preaching out of the Bible now. They've never done that before. And their churches are thrilled. They couldn't be more excited. And so we're just seeing all this fruit. And so what I'd like to do is just kind of share with you just an update on the various partnerships. I've been to 3 countries in the last 3 months, and in particular those countries. But right now we have 22 locations on 3 continents where we are teaching with English-speaking pastors and using a translator. That's the other thing. I have no idea how many other schools we have. Because all we do is we just tell them constantly, you need to take this, you need to go out here, you need to go train others, you need to go train others. We ask for a show of hands. All kinds of people raise their hand. I'm teaching others with this material. I've started a school. We know it's at least double. It's probably 2 times the number of English schools that we have. So the average English school is about 40 students. across all our schools. The average school with national is probably somewhere about around 15 students, maybe 20 students. So the numbers are a little different. But that has us teaching. So right now we're teaching somewhere in the neighborhood of 850 to 900 pastors with English-speaking pastors. And we probably are teaching somewhere in the neighborhood of, this is a much broader spectrum, I don't know, but probably a minimum 500-600 others, but maybe as much as another 1,000 or more through. So we may be probably around 2,000 pastors that are being trained right now because of this ministry, which is absolutely phenomenal. So I want to talk about some of the different partnerships. The first one I want to talk about is Belarus. So this is me in Belarus, and we have this is in Russian, and we're in the process of translating our material into Russian. This was the first time I went to Belarus, and it was an absolute disaster. I'm not going to lie to you. It was not good. So the guy who set it up, oh man, he's got me... He didn't give us enough time to complete the classes. He had me in places where there were not pastors. I didn't have hardly any pastors. This is a group of young college-age people, and I'm teaching church history to them. And we had a good crowd. They were incredibly enthusiastic, but the people who we partnered with did not set it up the way that it was supposed to set up. And I was thinking, man, when I got back, this is not going to have any traction. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I did meet... probably the most influential pastor in the convention and the IMB missionary for Belarus. And in the last 2 weeks, I've received, on their initiative, people from Belarus have contacted me. One is the president of the seminary, and the other one, they have 6 regions, and they have a bishop. The Baptist church has a bishop over each region. Now, this is a country, you need to understand, of close to 10 million people, and they have 12,000 Christians in the entire country. Let that sink in. 10 million people, 12,000 Christians. And I say that because the country is primarily Eastern Orthodox, but it was explained to me that they don't even go to church. It's just they're in name only. It's not something they practice. It's not something that's a part of their life over there. And there's just not a lot of participation. And the Orthodox Church works with the government there, and they suppress the Christian churches. So they can't build buildings, so it's not uncommon to find 6, 8, 10 churches meeting in the same building. And so it's somewhat oppressive for them there. Anyway, that's what's going on with the country. So I received a communication, an email from the president of the seminary. And, the other thing I learned when I was there, they said, we don't really necessarily need you to train pastors here. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. This is a lot of money over there. It's a hard trip, and I'm like, all the way over here, they said the pastors are sophisticated. Belarus is a very developed country. They have access to information, and so the pastors are trained. And so I was thinking, well, I don't really know. And so, but now I get an email from a guy named Peter Navarov. And Navarov, that's how you say it, Navarov. And so Peter, he's the president of the seminary, and this bishop, and they're both saying the same thing. They say, we don't need you to come train pastors. They say, we only have 12,000 evangelical Protestant Christians in the entire country. They said, we need people to plant churches, and we have no way to train them. They have a seminary in Minsk, which the country's vast, so that everybody can't come to Minsk, and they've tried everything to get people to come to the seminary. Well, our strategy isn't about coming to a brick and mortar institution, it's about going out. And so they're like, we want you to come show us. We want to use your process to begin training the young potential pastors so we can raise up church planters to go out and take this country. Now, that's a conversation I'm interested in having. And so that's what we're doing in Belarus. Go to the next one. This is El Salvador Partnership. So this is the class I just finished. Some of them got out the door so before we could actually get them in the picture. But this is the class I just finished teaching preaching in San Salvador, which is the capital of El Salvador. Now, this is larger than a typical class, and the reason is because they all needed preaching to finish their last course so they could graduate. We had a big graduation. They finished all 12 courses. And so we got them all in one place, the ones who needed to graduate. So there are others in each of these locations, and so they're in several cities. There's 2 locations from San Salvador represented here, and Usulután and Zacatecoluca. In January, we will be starting in Sonsonate, Huachaban, and Chalatenango. And so those are in the western side of the country, and once we get those 3 started, we now have El Salvador completely covered. which is really awesome. So that's going great. Go to some other pictures there. We had are there, Claudia, are there other pictures from El Salvador? Okay, so here's the course. This is me teaching the class. Go ahead and go to the next one. This is Ed Nario, the guy I was telling you about, who's the coordinator there. He's an amazing, awesome guy. And then Julio Flores was with him. That's me and Ed teaching again. Go to another one. That's the class. Go to the next one. The class again. So you can see, I mean, you see a lot of ladies there because of there's Pentecostal. And they have lady pastors, and so we have ladies in there. So this is me. Oh, go back to that last one. So this is me, Ed, and this is Miguel. And he is the pastor of the church where it was held. He was actually trained in the States. He's the most educated pastor I know in El Salvador. He went to Dallas Theological Seminary. He is one of our teachers. So we have as many teachers, national teachers now, as we have teachers from coming in from the States. And that's our strategy, is to come in, and now we're sharing instruction there. Half the courses in El Salvador are taught by Americans, half are taught by Salvadorans. And so Miguel is one of those pastors. Go ahead and go on to the next one. So this is me teaching again. Go on to the next one. That's it. Okay, I was hoping we'd have some of the graduation and some of that in there. There's some really great pictures of that. So that's El Salvador. So El Salvador, they said that, so we graduated 86. They said in the 3 cities in which we graduated people, we have 108 signed up starting next year, but we're starting in 3 additional cities. And so El Salvador is going to increase greatly. And they said all 3 cities have a lot of interest. We're expecting 30, 40, 50 or more people in each of the locations in El Salvador. So go ahead and go on to the next one. The Honduras Partnership. I'm not going to talk a lot about that. We don't have a lot of new stuff going on. We're actually going to be finishing up into Tule and San Jose, which is the Lenca people up in the mountains. It's kind of a tribal people up there. We were the first white people they'd ever heard teach, which was, I was the first white guy they ever heard teach, they said. Some of the locations, they had never seen white people because it's just way up in the mountains in coffee plantations, in banana plantations, things like that. And most of these people here, this is just one of the locations. This is the one in Tule. And so this location here, again, this is exclusively Pentecostal, and no one in this group has more than a 3rd grade education. And no one has ever attempted to train them. And in the other location that's like this one, the one, and they have about the same amount of pastors. They're so excited. It's hard for us to teach the course because the instructors keep getting standing ovations with everything. They just love it. They just think it's the greatest thing, and they get so excited about the material. In fact, the other location in San Jose, the mayor comes. And so the mayor of the city comes out before every class, and he greets everybody and introduces everybody because it's the greatest thing he thinks has happened to his city. And then he posts a guard out front. Not like we need one, but he has a guard because in Latin America they always have a guard, So also actually I forgot to mention, in the San Salvador Partnership, the mayor of one of the cities that we go to, and this is a city of 1.5 million people, traveled 2.5 hours to come to our graduation. And he allows us to use the city buildings, because that's what he thinks of the school and the reputation of what it is that we're doing. So that's what's going on in Honduras. We'll go to the next one. This is our Peru Partnership, our Peruvian Partnership. This is going gangbusters. And I've told you all about Julio Rojas Flores before. So we have Spanish language schools. Those are the ones where the Americans come teach. Right? And so I'm actually going in February, and we're going to start the schools in Lima, Tinqui, and Pautucambo. And so we're going to be starting those and getting those going. And then Julio goes, and he teaches in Quechua. And he teaches it again in the same 3 locations because there are pastors in those locations that don't understand Spanish. And so he teaches in Quechua and all these other places. So 7 additional places where we have schools in Quechua through Julio. And again, these are all just the English-speaking ones. There are nationals going out and doing this everywhere. So go on to the next one. This is Sierra Leone. And we were in Waterloo and Wellington, and this is where I lost my voice. You see how it's long and deep. And trying to project there to the back of the room. Notice that they all got matching shirts. They got those gray shirts, and they were so excited. And these are the guys. And here's what they told me after this. So after we had the class, and I taught preaching, and I told the leader of the area, the leader of the pastors there is the pastor of First Baptist Church Waterloo, and his name's Tom Levy. And he's just an amazing man of God. And he's been my coordinator. And so I told Pastor Levy, I said, Pastor, I want you to get your best, most reliable pastors, the ones who you think would be capable and interested in taking this out and teaching others. And so he had 12 guys. And so we had a meeting for like 2 hours. And I'm talking to these 12 guys, and I'm talking to them about the program and everything. And I usually have that meeting to begin setting the culture of the program of reproduction. You need to go out. Well, they were trying to convince me if they could reproduce it. And they were like, we won't let you down. You need to come back. We will be faithful. We promise. And it was like, please, let us do this. They've already identified 9 provinces that they're going to go out to all throughout Sierra Leone, and they want to go to Guinea, they want to go to Liberia. So they're asking me, can we take this to other countries? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, what do you need me to do? I got a phone call. I'm sitting in the airport with Sean and Kathy, and Tom Levy calls me on the phone. And he told me that they bought an office, or they got an office now. I don't know what that means. But they got an office, and they're meeting there several times a week to study and pray so they can get ready to take the pastor school to Muslim Africa. And here's what they told me in the meeting. They said, we are ready to give our lives. They said, we will give our lives to go out and do this. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, in America, do you ever hear anybody talk like that? But they're serious. Go out and show a couple of the other pictures. So this is me, some of the guys. I'm trying to get to the truck so we can go, and they're grabbing me, and they want to take a picture. And it's a lot of the young guys, so they grab me there. And so that's me after the class. I couldn't even speak. Remember, I came home and I couldn't talk, and it was, I couldn't even speak at this time. And so there I am with some of the guys. Go on to the next one. So here's some of the classes, some of the breakouts, so we do little exercises in the preaching class, and you can see that they're just, in their Bibles. It's intense. I mean, Latin America, we're just blown up. I can't believe how God is working. I'll tell you this, Latin America's bush league compared to the level of commitment and desire that we're seeing in Africa. And I'm convinced that as we go back there, we're going to see stuff far greater than what we're seeing in Latin America. I've never seen a more motivated group of people to do anything. Just incredible. Go on to the next one. We did a crusade in the evenings after the school. And so I wanted to show this picture. You see the one guy's got a chair over there? I don't know. I just have to tell you something. I know we have an African sister over here. Praise God. I was not prepared for the worship at the crusade. It's funny. So we're in Freetown, right? So Freetown was a town that was settled by slaves from America and the Caribbean. And so at some point in history, the British decided they were going to go, and anybody who wanted to go back to Africa, they could go back to Africa. So they collected slaves from America and from the Caribbean, and they brought them back, and they took them to Freetown, which is why they call it Freetown. And so they brought back the influence from the Caribbean. And so the worship music sounds like calypso music. It sounds like you're on a cruise ship. I thought I was on a cruise ship. And they got these guys, and they're so good. They said they had this one guy, and they would trade off. The worship would go for like 2 hours. And they're like chanting and giving like instructions. So there's this one song, Shake Your Booty for Jesus. Like, I'm not kidding. There is a song. Have you heard that song? Have you heard that song? And they shake their booty for Jesus. And they have another song that I'm a winner. It's all about winners. And they were driving down, you see Winner Baptist Church. Yeah, they want to be a winner. But there's this one song where they're doing the calypso thing, and they're just killing it, and it's like the guy in the cruise ship, and they're like, shout for Jesus. And he goes like, everybody goes, Jesus. And then they're like, jump for Jesus. And everybody just starts jumping, and it's crazy. It's just crazy. And then they're like, get low for Jesus. And everybody's going like this, And, and then they're like, run for Jesus. And they run. They're running across this middle section. And then they go, take something with you. Take something with you. And they pick up their chairs. And everybody puts the chairs over their head. How come we don't have worship like that? How come we don't have worship like that? It was the craziest thing. I felt like I was on a cruise ship for Jesus. I mean, it was just absolutely unbelievable. And we preached, and hundreds of people. We had our goal was 1,000. We ended up with 800 people coming, but maybe different people each night. But we had at least 100 decisions each night. I preached one time and had over 100 decisions. In fact, I preached at a school. That's where my decisions, because it wasn't at the crusade, it was at another location. And there was a girl who was there, an American girl from LA, and she got saved. Because the Spirit just gets moving, and people are just getting saved everywhere. And it was really cool because I asked Pastor Levy, again, who's just an incredible guy. I said, Pastor Levy, how many of the Muslims are ever converted to Christianity? He said, none ever. How many of the Christians are converted to Islam? He said, none ever. I said, how many of the Muslims are converted to Christianity? He said, all of them. He said, every convert we have comes from Islam. And they're coming into the church. He said, but it never goes the other way, ever. Never seen it. And so it's powerful. God is doing a thing. Do we have any more? Is that the last one, Claudia? That's it. Okay, I thought so. Guys, again, I don't know how to really articulate the spirit of it. You have to go. I want to encourage you to speak with Sean and Kathy. They're going to kind of hang around just a little bit. They got some family stuff later. But talk to them in the lobby and ask them the spirit of it, the energy of it, the life-changing nature of what these pastors are experiencing. They will tell you too, man, this has changed my life. This has changed my ministry. It's changed my church. And again, it's not anything special. You can go out and look. It's meat and potatoes, basic Christianity, basic theology, how to preach, how to interpret the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, basic evangelism, basic discipleship. But they've never had it. And that's where 90+% of the pastors in the world are. And, God is advancing His kingdom. And it's vehicles like this that I think He can use, to do great things. And so what we're doing is awesome. Again, there needs to be 1,000 more groups doing what we're doing. But you're a part of that. And none of that would have been possible without you allowing me to have this time the last 3 months. I am just so incredibly grateful and incredibly tired. But so incredibly grateful for everything that God is doing. And I don't see where it's going to end. I just don't see it. Because everywhere we go, the possibilities are just, the drive is coming from the field. It's not coming from me. We have never once gone to a location where we were not invited, where someone did not ask us to come. We're just keeping up with the Spirit. And it's a scary place to be, but it's also just an incredibly satisfying place to be, to see this kind of impact. And again, the life change and the kingdom. I guess the thing, it just floored me. I think Sean was in that conversation. It just floored me. I asked Pastor Ed, how many churches have been started out of this? And that's just in El Salvador. I know for a fact, because I've talked to the people, that in Honduras, the same thing is happening. They're out planting churches after this. And so, again, our little church, you talk about what a church is about and what it needs to be about. And for me, I use this phrase, a kingdom footprint. What's your kingdom footprint? Guys, the kingdom footprint of Living Stones is absolutely insane. And it's not me. Repeatedly, I say it over there. It's not me. I'm just trying to keep up. Just trying to be as faithful as I can. It's not Alan. It's not Ed. It's not Luis or Julio or Tom Balevi. It's God. And he's doing these crazy things. And we're along for the ride. And you are along for the ride on this journey with us. And so thank you so much from the Lord for your willingness to share me, to share resources. I've never once had anybody push back on me or make me feel bad about this. And I have pastors tell me all the time, my church would never allow me to do this. In fact, I have some pastors who go one time a year and their churches don't like it. And so, man, I can't imagine being in a church like that. I don't ever want to be in a church like that. But a church like this, that does this and allows this, is very, very rare indeed. And so God bless you. Let's pray.